Thank you, everyone. I'm Jason Heredia. I lead the product development marketing on this side of the world for Steelcase, a little company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but it's actually doing an enormous amount of work over this side of the world. One of the purposes of me being over on this side of the world is we're deep into research and understanding of Asia-Pacific market in Australia. In fact, 2 months ago, I had the chance to tour some amazing sites here in Melbourne. And I rapidly wrote back to all my friends after I saw them and said, oh my God, you'll never believe what's going on in Melbourne. It was my friends in Europe, actually. And it's pretty impressive how people in Australia have embraced alternate planning. It's like a common thing now. There are many parts of the world where that is just not what's going on. But what I'm specifically interested in, I had part of my career in research and development. And so as part of that, we're curious about always what's on the horizon. So I want to share with you a little bit today more perspectives. And so I'll start with the big question, the elephant in the room. This is an exercise I love to do with clients. Why have an office? And then you tell them the story that you work for Steelcase, and they're always like, oh, you make furniture? I'm sorry. Because everybody's mobile, everybody's virtual. Why are you, this business must be dying, I'm sorry. The other way to look at it with a client is when the finance guy comes in and says, well, let's optimize more. Well, play the exercise. Okay, I can optimize to 0. What are you going to miss? And that's really, I think, will tell us the true story here, is if we had no office, what would we miss? And so we've done this survey and research quite a few times around the world. And the quick version, it's these 3 things. The 3 things that the office actually provides in a virtual work anywhere world, that the value of the physical element are these 3 things. Collaboration, meaning you want to work with other people. And I'll talk to you a little bit about different types of collaboration. There is one type of collaboration which is this intense generation of new ideas. That still requires some degree of physical proximity, and I'll go into detail on that. The second one is social and culture. It turns out like we as humans want to be part of something bigger than us. Those of you who have read the Daniel Pink work, I think that's probably the best example. His book on basic human motivation. Turns out physical has a little bit to do with that as well. I'm not saying you can't do that virtually. I'm just saying physical does play really well there. And then resources. I like to call this the things I can't afford on my own. There will always be a new technology I can't afford personally, and it will drag me into the office. So today, that's the giant telepresence unit. That very rapidly will come down and be more affordable, and we'll all have them on our laptops. Then there will be something else. Who knows what it is? But that resource will always be. So these are the quick version of the 3 reasons an office will still exist. And if those aren't important to your CFO or your managers, it's a pretty short conversation. Let's all just go home and work out of our office. So let me keep going then on some other thoughts for you. As we've seen planning progress in the world in various stages, I think activity-based planning, like I said, is amazing to see how it's blossomed and everywhere. But we're really trying to look at the next thing. And the hint of that is this thing called the Globally Integrated Enterprise, GIEs. It's a term that the McKinsey people of the world and the IBMs of the world toss around. This idea that there are nodes, whether it's within the same country, the same city, or the world, that work together now in kind of this virtual nodes of networking. So what we're fascinated by is this thing called the interconnected workplace. We think the next step and the next evolution of community-based planning is this thing that says, how do you connect the nodes together, whether it's physical or virtual? And this is the hard thing. This is the thing no one's really quite figured out yet, but we're trying to get down there. So we talked about the increasingly distributed teams, in other words, the interconnected workplace. It has to work harder and smarter. What I thought I'd do is just randomly pick out 5 research topics and maybe give you some highlights on them real quick. And maybe use it as food for discussion later or during a cocktail or over coffee. And it's a good reason. The first one is types of collaborations. I started to talk about this. When people say, oh, we need to collaborate more, we've actually done a fair amount of work, not just Steelcase, but out there in the public literature, that says it's important to really challenge that discussion and say there are 3 major types of collaboration. The one we're all familiar with is informative. This is what the traditional meeting room has been designed for. Big table, chairs around it, we sit there, you listen, and we all walk away. This room's an informative layout of how we solve for that. The next cycle of that is evaluative. That's where we kind of have to come together, look at some information, and make some decisions. I think the Monday morning project meeting is a good example of that. It's not just listening, we're actually trying to resolve some issues. The holy grail that endless books have been written about is generative. This is the one where, you know, the skunk works, the brainstorming, the IDEO sessions. Those are the ones that come to mind where a cross-functional group of people come together and have to create something new that didn't exist when they walked into that room. That's hard. And that's actually where we as an organization are spending the majority of our time right now. That's the one we think is the one that's going to add the most value. We've also, I don't have this today, but next year maybe I can share this. We've done a cross-segmentational study on how this changes by geography. So we can tell you in Australia versus China versus India how this begins to change. Not all countries' cultures are on the same mix of these right now, nor do they value them the same way. So when we talk about designing for enhanced collaboration, it's obviously about people, place, and information. That's nothing new. What workers want is access to information. We're fortunate that we've done over 20,000 surveys with clients. We have survey tools. We, as part of, you know, helping our architectural friends, we do put these out there. And we've collected quite a bit of information. These are the three big things that come up. But one little example I want to talk to you about, trying to make this concrete, is this thing we call passengers and drivers. Transparency turns out to be a big theme in collaboration as you get more sophisticated about it. What I mean by that is, imagine all these meetings that are going on in little rooms with doors. And somebody walks by that meeting who has the magical answer or input to whatever's happening behind that door. It never connects. The door and the glass, whatever that is, stops that. But there's practical reasons why we do that, right? Privacy, focus, flow, all these things. What we're fascinated by is maybe there is a way to do both. And so we came up with this idea, this thing called passengers and drivers, that take it out of the room and put it in situ more open, and allow that people could be walking by and behaviorally give them something that they are okay approaching it. So here we're using a ledge with a stool because there's all sorts of human behavioral examples that people understand what a ledge and a stool is about. It's temporal. It's not forever. You can come, you can rest, you can leave. So there is somebody driving the meeting and the content inside of it, and on the outside are the passerbys, the passengers, the people that are allowed to kind of impromptu stop and leave and stop and leave. So this is actually a software company in New Jersey who then took the analogy into a library to kind of give it a more metaphor that people understood. But the passengers and drivers is an example of transparency. I think this ties to the digital natives work as well. Transparency is an interesting discussion. It culturally is at odds with a big percentage of the workforce right now's age group. So over time, we think transparency is going to be this bigger deal. This other thing, we just talked about transparency. Let me give you a provocative example of something we haven't commercialized, but this idea of digital exhaust. What if you could walk into a space and snippets of every email in the organization was being thrown up on a screen? Digital exhaust. Does that change your awareness of what's actually happening in the organization? So that's not a real product, but I'm using it to illustrate what transparency could mean in a future state for people. Once again, going back to connecting and interconnected workplaces. Because you can throw digital exhaust anywhere in the world. You don't have to have it in a physical location. All right, so let's talk about distributed teams for a second. This is a picture from Skype. Skype is fortunate to work with us, and they do a lot of work. I mentioned that the video conferencing, telepresence technologies are changing. It's not that telepresence is going away. Telepresence is great because of the high definition, the audio quality, but we're seeing much more casual use of those tools. And how do they become prolific in everything? I have a Cisco mobile unit on my laptop that I call into the big $20,000, $100,000 units. And I have to tell you, it works good. I miss the audio quality. We see this as a huge trend as people are going to continue to do that. Collaborative work, I won't go for sake of time deep on that. We're working, this is a picture from a case study that Apple has on their website with GE about this idea of creating destination moments for this higher level of collaboration. One of my favorite examples is when a company says, we need to be more collaborative, and they take out some cubicles and they throw in some upholstered furniture. How many times have we all seen that fail? And no one uses it. Well, it turns out there's some behavioral reasons. One, humans innately want to protect their back. And so just taking furniture and throwing it in the middle of open plan doesn't quite solve for that. But there's also it should be a destination. Upholstered furniture does a piece of that, but it doesn't quite get us there. Sharing is still really hard. So this is a product we designed that's used, you see it out there in the thing. The idea of this product was instantaneous sharing, not fiddling around with the VGA connectors. You get up, you can rapidly take control of the meeting, and almost with the little pucks you can change who's in control. This is this give it back and push it and make it almost easy to do that people actually take advantage of it. And that little totem in the center there, there's actually a reason for that. It turns out it gives a semblance of protecting your back. This can be plopped into a space and does that. Now we go to the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail, which no one's figured out yet, is the fully immersive room that listens and plays back to everything you're doing. And oh, by the way, shares that across the world to other places. The closest I've seen to that is a product that we do, or our partner Cisco provides, which is this immersive room that combines telepresence with right board capturing, with good audio, and GE standardized globally on this. Any GE folks in the room? One of my favorite things is you can schedule a room in Mumbai that looks just like this, and you can schedule one in London that looks just like that. And the idea is it's a reliable, repeatable experience that you don't have to figure out where the tools are. It's one of the problems that breaks down in some of these collaborative rooms is the tools are so hard to figure out. I mean, how many people bought those little marker boards and never used them? Those little digital marker boards? Part of it is just they're complex to some people. I mean, they're hard to figure them out. That's the Holy Grail. So I'm not saying we have the answer today, but I'm just pointing it out. So for sake of time, let me tell you about an experiment we're doing. We talked about this last time, and it's evolved now to an extent. We're guinea pigs on ourselves. We, as a global organization, have nodes around the world where we do work. So for example, we do a lot of engineering in Kuala Lumpur and Tokyo. We do marketing in North America. We do industrial design in 5 different places around the world. These nodes we're trying to connect together. One of the biggest problems we see is social trust bonds breaking down when you go to distributed teams. So this idea, harken back to the BPO era where people were building call centers in India. Well, those are no longer call centers in India. Accenture is hiring something like 200,000 people in India in the next 5 years. They're not just doing call centers now. They're knowledge-based workers. What's interesting is when you hand work off on the time zone around the world, one of the things that breaks down in the social trust boundaries is this perception that people are working as hard as you are and that they have the same common goal that you have. So social trust is a pretty big deal. We saw it firsthand. We have, like I said, in Kuala Lumpur, we have a center that supports the regions around this side of the world. And there was this tension that if they've never met each other physically before, it's hard. Physical meeting creates a social trust bond fairly rapidly, actually. Having coffee, having beer. If you don't have that, and all you ever had to do was work via the telepresence, there's something missing. So what we're playing with is this idea of the virtual bench. So this is Kuala Lumpur. This is a bench, and on the other end of the bench is a Cisco unit with 2 cameras pointed into another bench in Tokyo. These 2 teams work together, and so when Tokyo turns off the lights to go home, Kuala Lumpur sees that. When somebody's birthday happens in Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo sees that. The idea that it's a long bench, you're looking into it. There's been plenty of experiments about wormholes and all sorts of things in the past. This is an evolution of that. What really makes this work is the better audio. It's really not so much about the video, believe it or not. It's about being able to overhear breath in what people are saying at the bench. Now think about this. Culturally, that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But it's interesting what it does for social trust bonds when you put that back into the situation. So we're investing $250,000 now in this. We love it. The performance was so exciting for us that we're creating virtual benches all over our regions now. The key teams now just look into each other all the time. And it's actually commercializing. This is part of what it will really look like in real life. And this is the joking example of what the bench looks like as you look through the hole. So it's like, like I said, you're sharing everything together. All right, let's switch topics and talk about creative and lean. Creative and lean is always this thing of we're trying to do things better, faster, cheaper. Everybody's trying to do that. This is a great, I want to try and illustrate where this might go. Does this look familiar to anybody? Does everybody have this in their building? This is the stereotype, right? This is what an intensive collaborative meeting. This is actually an aerospace company. And what's interesting is everyone around the table makes a lot of money. And they flew in for this meeting. In those 3 types of meetings I was talking about, 3 types of collaboration, this is generative. This is people flying in from all over the world, locking themselves in a room with a bunch of flip charts and whiteboards. And their goal is to create something that didn't exist. Now they have telepresence, so they've got people all in the room. But what's interesting is when you dissect this from a behavioral standpoint, we go in and we observe like, we're Jane Goodall, gorillas in the mist. We have sociologists and anthropologists that help us on this as part of what we do. And what's interesting is how everybody brings their tools to the meeting, throws them on the table, and then pushes away. This is a repeated behavior. I can go into any meeting and observe this behavior happen. So we take that and we try and figure out what can we design with that? What cool thing can we do with it? Turns out people push away from the table as a couple things. It's a social cue that I'm engaging with you when the conversation gets intense. I'm not doing this, I'm actually listening to you. I push away from the table and engage. It's also sometimes you get your head out of the way. So, I know, it's not brain surgery. But we've played around with this and said, what if there was a different way to do this? And so one of the other cues we found was that proximity to the floor almost dictates intimacy. So what I mean by that is I'm standing on the door jamb visiting you, and I say, and I'm leaning on the door, how long is this conversation going to last? My proximity to the floor is giving you a cue. I'm not going to take a lot of time. If we were cross-legged on the floor having a meeting right now, how long is this going to last? We're very committed at that point. So this is another example how you take that all together. And whether you build your own or you use our product, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to illustrate the point here. That what if you lowered that generative collaborative experience down to almost like a continental tea height? And you came up with something that was not a lounge chair and not a task chair. It's something new. It does both. The idea that you could sit cross-legged, you can go cockeyed, you can push back. And oh, by the way, what if we took the table and halved the size of it, half the width, and then made these little slide-out tablets that come to you? So when I throw my technology on the table and I push away, I can then grab it, pull it to me, and push it back away if I want it. This is an example where you can try and reinvent the way we use the real estate. But what's more exciting is that initial impact when people sit in it and go, ah, I get it. It feels right. This feels like how I wanted to have a collaborative, generative session where we push away and we create things. And that shows you from a top view how that begins to play. So that's it. I'll show you another example, and I'm running out of time here. Another thing we played around with, we have design nodes around the world. Like I said, these are industrial design teams and researchers. One is in Hong Kong, where I'm from. And in Hong Kong, we played with this idea that in the past, people have done these things called 7x7s. Basically, a team will wake up in America, do something, and hand it off to a team in Europe or Asia, and then they iterate on that. They've done that before. What we decided was to push the boundaries and do 8x8. 8x8 by 8 by 8. So the idea is there was a team in Asia, Paris, a team in Michigan, and a team in Hong Kong. They were cross-functional teams. And we started with a central question in the morning. Hong Kong kicked it off, and the team iterated what would be the solution to that problem. Design, market, we're all sketching, we're all doing iterative process. And then we get on the phone with Paris at 4 o'clock. We say, hello, Paris, this is Hong Kong. Here's where we got to today. In the cloud, you can find all our content. We thought these were the 4 biggest nuggets. We're handing it off to you now. It's yours. But here's the twist. Do what you want and iterate. You don't have to use anything of what we just said, but don't tell America what you saw from us. And so Paris works on it for 8 hours. They call America and say, hello, America, this is Paris. This is what we've iterated. These are where our files are in the cloud. But they saw nothing of what Hong Kong did. And this is the iteration, this idea. It's almost like that old telephone game when you're a kid. You spread the secret to one person who spreads it to another person. And it's something totally different by the time. That's what we're fascinated with is does the output become radically different because we're iterating but not necessarily just doing handoffs. And so we're pretty excited about it. In fact, the products we're working on right now for the next generation are coming out of this process right now. All right, how are we doing? I'm looking at time check here. Let me see, what else we want to talk about? We'll go through this, frameworks. I mentioned this a little earlier. This activity-based planning and community-based planning have used this type of model forever. This is not brain surgery. This I, we, is one way to look at the activities you're doing. And then owned or shared. Obviously, very advanced here in how we look at owned versus shared. I mentioned a little bit of this new thing, which I'll just elaborate on, is we did research in San Francisco where we went to 16 people and followed them during the day. And these were knowledge-based workers. So, for example, one gentleman was the head of animation for Pixar, the animation studio. We followed them, whether they were at work, in the car, on the bus, in the home, whatever, it didn't matter. And we debriefed, what are we finding out of all these things? The one thing is, I'll tell you, I've never been part of research, this idea of life and work merging. It's not balanced. Let's just be honest about it. There's no balance between life and work. It's kind of just all hodgepodge. And that's tense for a lot of people. I've never been part of research where 2 of the 16 subjects actually cried during the interviews in the day. And what you realize, this is really emotional for people. This balance is very personal. And what it turns out, one of the biggest findings we had was, I described it earlier, that between I and we, there's a new state evolving called you and I. And I think it's a bit of guilt. I think it's a bit of trying to be with your people you care about. But what we saw, the most obvious way to visualize that is people literally drag their work into the TV room or into the kitchen just so they can be near the people they care about. But they're not talking to those people. And this is a trend. We think this is, you can observe this behavior happening in the workplace as well. That there's this thing about, I'm a part of this team, and I've been on the road for 2 weeks, and I really want to show you that I care, but I got to get my email done, so I'm just going to sit with you here for a second in this cafe or this open area. But we don't plan for that yet. We've never designed for this new stage of you and I, or I haven't seen good examples of this one yet. That how do you allow somebody to be with you, but not collaborating with you? It's something very radically different that we're playing around with. So, and you guys know how that all works. So in closing, we think this interconnected workplace is about really three things. This idea of coming together. The distributed teams is a big deal. I skipped over a piece of research that we call the contingent workforce, that there's a pretty big statistic on the percentage of people that are part of the organization that don't work for the organization. It's almost doubled in the past 5 years, and it's about to double again is the prediction. As companies got really smart to say, I don't need to have you on my balance sheet, I can just hire a consultant, those people still are part of the team, still need to collaborate, still need to connect, but yet, how do we support that? So it's an interesting dialogue to have in the planning discussions about the contingent workforce. What if it doubled? Not just saying we're having more shared spaces. What if it doubled? What would we do? And how do we support those kind of things? Range of diverse settings we talked about. Stimulation, physical support. Stimulation, I think, is a little hidden area. I think a lot of clients, some of the sites I saw here, do an amazing job at that. This idea of people want to be stimulated and be part of that bigger good. And then finally, reinforced culture. That's what it is. So that's my closing, and I'd love to talk to you over coffee or whatever else.
Jason, thanks very much indeed. Terrific. Always good to hear good research turning into practical applications. Could you just comment a little bit upon some of the differences you're seeing about how groups of people actually work in different parts of the world? Do you actually see any differences? Is Asia different, for example?
This was the big myth that I think Ian Stewart, who's our new head of Melbourne here, he was on part of the team, we argued about this nonstop. That there's this myth that China doesn't collaborate. Now, I think we all intuitively know that's not true, but what we did is some observational research, and we did something called Office Code, which tried to dive deeper into this. Office Code. It's the big aha is yes, they do collaborate. If you go to that diagram of the types of collaborations, it's on a different scale, meaning generative new idea collaboration is at a different percentage of total collaboration